Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of run-down no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know.
My Bigfoot sightings began in 1976. We were living in Great Falls, Montana. And what I remember my mom calling this area, she always called it the Flats. It was up near the airport in Great Falls, and we lived next to what I believed was a reservation. We lived in a small trailer. We had about 10 acres, surrounded by alfalfa fields. There was a quarry that was basically at the end of our 10-acre fence, and then across the road. My mom always called it the quarry. I've never been down there, so I actually do not know if it was an actual quarry. I used to go horseback riding with a Native American girl. I was 8.5, almost 9 years old in 76, and she taught me how to ride bareback. Now, mind you, I had a very small Shetland pony, and her pony was a little bit bigger than mine. The only way that I could ride with her is if I rode bareback. Bareback, and then with just a rope, for no bit or anything like that, just a rope around the nozzle. We never had issues going horseback riding. Back in 76, it was very safe for two young girls to go riding far away from home. We set out that morning. It was like a late afternoon. And riding the horses along, we decided to ride along the rock quarry. We have never done that before because of the neighbor. Our neighbor had some pretty vicious dogs, and he felt that he owned that dirt road. So when he was home, he would let his dogs loose, and they would chase whoever's on that road, chase them on home. Well, he wasn't home. His dogs were not home, so we figured it was safe. We decided to go that way, and we were just strolling along on the horses. The horses started to get a little antsy, but we didn't pay no mind to it, just tried to settle them down. We smelt something really bad. We did not know what it was. I'm assuming it was dead animal. Being 8.5 years old, I'm not familiar with, other scents than just dead animal. We covered our noses. We complained. We were saying, oh gosh, that was really stinky, and just covering our noses and just still walking along. And our horses' ears, when they prep up and they turn, that's usually they're letting you know, like, in that direction, there's something going on. And we just still kept going. We seen a big, huge rock came flying up, and it landed on right in front of the fence, the barbed wire fence that divided the road to the quarry. So it didn't hit us, but I wanted to say at the time, basketball-sized rock. And we were thinking it was just the native boys down at the bottom of the hill, just having fun, teasing us. So we're yelling at them, stupid boys, we're not scared. And we just continue on riding. And then we heard like a roar, like a cross between a roar and a growl. Now, it's something that I've never heard before. I couldn't even say if it was a bear. It didn't sound like a bear, didn't sound like a mountain lion. And I don't know if it was human or not, but we were still yelling at the boys, "Stupid boys, we're not afraid of you," that kind of thing, and just still kept riding. Now, my friend, who was a few years older than me, her horse was ahead of mine, and hers was like towards the right of me. My horse was behind her on the left. So basically, my horse's head was practically touching her horse's butt. And she turned to the left, which would make her look towards the quarry and the barbed wire fence. And I just looked up at her, watching her, and then she turned her horse around real quick and said, "We're going home." Now, mind you, her father always told me, if you're going to ride with her, you need to listen to her. She knows this land. She knows what's going on. She knows what's safe, what is not safe. If she says you're to leave, you're to leave. I did exactly that. I turned my horse around right along with her. I didn't even bother looking at what she looked at. Started to head back. She did her little horse call and she just hightailed it home. Now, my home was much closer to this where we turned around. My home was much closer. If you, like basically 10 acres worth of field, because our land was just one rectangle, 10 acres. When I got to my road, she was already halfway down because she was hightailing it. And I decided, well, I better hightail it home. When I got home, I took my horse, Minnie, that was her name. I put her in the field, locked the gates, went inside the house. I was alone that day. Back then, it's, parents go to work, kids stay at home. The summer, it was okay for me to be home alone. Was never worried about anything. I walked into the trailer, and as I was walking in, I caught something at the left of my eye, like out in the alfalfa field that was adjacent to our home across the dirt road. And I'm thinking it was a freshly cut alfalfa field. And not many people know what first and second and third cutting is, but I'm going to say it was like the second cutting that year. I went to the window because I was thinking, what is this? Is this a big man? This is a big man, and I'm looking out there. And at the time I didn't understand distance, but now I do. So now I can say that was about 50 yards. So I'm looking about 50 yards out into the alfalfa field. And I see this dark, huge, brown man running. But it had like massive legs, and all I could think of was, that is one big football player. That's all I could think of. This is a football player running across the field, but he's doing weird motions because it was just long strides with the legs. And if I could describe it from the distance, it almost appeared as if he was wearing like a hairy trench coat. No neck. So the head was pretty much round. It wasn't sure that conical, like steep, like head. So that's what made me think man. And I ducked down real quick because I'm thinking it's running towards my home. I'm by myself. Now I know how to work a BB gun, but I didn't know how to work, shoot the 22 that was leaned up against the front door. And I'm thinking, well, door's not locked. And I just sat there for like a brief, not even 2 seconds maybe. So I snuck back up to look out, and it was gone. So I rushed through all the windows from like the right side of the home to where it happened, to the kitchen to the left. And this is all flat land. So there's no trees that it could have hid behind. The houses are, the first house is maybe 2 acres, like across the way. And then the other one is another 10 acres away. So I was thinking to myself, like, this man moved awfully quick. Where did it go? You know, I've had some people question me and say, well, maybe it dropped down to all fours. And I'm thinking, there's no way. If it dropped down to all fours, I would have seen like maybe a dirt mound, because then it would have looked like just a dirt mound out there. Now, I was scared. I, by myself. My mom came home. I didn't bother telling her, because if I would have told her this, she would never allow me to go out and go horseback riding, because sometimes I'd go alone. I had no fear back then. I still don't have any fear, and that's what worries my family now. I'm an extremely adventurous person, always have been, and it started from childhood. I believe I was a little nervous that day, because I just didn't quite understand what this man was doing. Where did it go? Why was he so big? How could he run so fast? That night, 3 nights, 3 nights after that, my mom listening to the news, and I was in the kitchen. The news brought up a sighting of Bigfoot in our area. And I just kind of was watching and listening, and, I still didn't say anything to my mom. And, I remember my mom commenting and laughing, Bigfoot, huh? And just laughing. And my stepfather at the time was saying, oh, it's probably a bear. So, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I'm thinking, you know what? I don't know what it was. I'm not going to pay no attention to it. Like, if it was Bigfoot or not, you always listen to your parents. If they say it's a bear, it's a bear. But that day, what I saw was not a bear. Then shortly after that, a few days after that on the news, they said that they found an ape costume, like a gorilla costume, by the airport outside the men's bathroom on the floor. So I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe that's what that was, and thinking, all right. So I didn't pay no mind to it. But when they showed the costume, I'm thinking, that didn't look like what I saw. I just left it at that. I never thought about it, never allowed it to bother me. But that image, the smell, the rock, the growl, that has never left my mind. Not once. I can't say I was troubled, but I would say my mind, until this day, I'm 58 years old. I'm still processing it, because it's something that happened that's unbelievable. It didn't take until my early 20s and maybe even my teens to understand that it's a possibility that was a Sasquatch. Understanding the characteristics of its behavior, the rock, the smell, the howl. I even told a friend once, and I got made fun of. So I thought, I'm not going to tell another soul. I'm just going to keep it to myself. I did tell my husband prior to us getting married, because I figured he better know, like, all of me. I just figured, I gotta tell you something. And I told him, and I said, I honestly believe that it was a Sasquatch. I said, there's no other explanation to that. I mean, how does a large man run through an alfalfa field so fast and then disappear? Within a snap, just disappear. Now, we all heard stories that they're quick, They're extremely elusive. They know how to hide. But where did this creature hide this day? Did it hide underneath our trailer? Did it make it that quick and hide underneath our trailer because there was parts of the skirting that was open? Possible. But I don't think any man with that stature be able to run and disappear like that. There's just no way. I mean, I think I would have been able to see him still running down the road. We had 2 roads. We lived on the T, and I didn't see that. And it's an image that I'll never forget. It's a day that I'll never forget. Do I feel honored and blessed? I guess I could say yeah, because not very many people get to see these things. Like I said, I don't have no explanation now. A few days later, I went horseback riding with the Native American, and she never brought it up, what she saw that day. And I do know with some tribes, they don't discuss it. And I'm wondering, I wish I remembered her name, because I would love to call her and say, what did you see that day? But I do not remember her name. We moved, I believe, that year, that summer, the end of the summer, we moved down to Florida. But she never mentioned a word, and we never went back down towards the quarry ever again. It was strictly on the res, and we just stayed there. And that's pretty much the encounter there in Great Falls. Now, all through camping that we have always done when we were in Montana, I don't think I have never encountered anything in the woods. Charlie, my mom's boyfriend at the time, I call him my stepdad because he was like a father to me. He always taught me, when you go into the woods, you're to ask the woods, before you enter. It is okay to speak to the trees, play with the water, play with the soil. And he wasn't even native. I believe that he was just brought up to do that. He was an avid hunter, but he also believed in being adventurous. And I've always done that. I didn't hear no more about Bigfoot. I would just hear stories, throughout my life. We recently moved here to Pennsylvania, on the east side of Pennsylvania. And we were talking to my husband about Bigfoot. And I said, there's so many movies now about, Bigfoot. And I said, and how horrific they are. And I said, and I would chuckle and I'd say, man, I'm wondering if Bigfoot wasn't following me, was going to take me home and eat me. I mean, I was a chunky girl. So I joke around with him and how Facebook will pick up your talking and stuff like that. Well, a little over 2 years ago, I had Bigfoot stuff just popping up in my feed on Facebook, and there was a Bigfoot conference going on north of us. And I thought, you know what? Told my husband, I'm like, let's go to this Bigfoot conference. I said, I want to see what it's all about. And I said, people meeting and talking about Bigfoot. And I said, and he says, absolutely, let's go. That's where I met Mary Fabian. I met Gwendolyn Purcell. I met a few other people, and they were talking about their encounters. I then felt safe enough to open up, and I told them my encounter in Montana, and it literally brought me to tears. I can't, you can hear it in my voice. I still get a little, choked up about it. It just felt really good to talk to somebody that wasn't going to ridicule me. and a lot of them confirmed to me and said, it's most likely you witnessed a Bigfoot. There's no other explanation. None. And I'm okay with that. So that actually made me just feel a lot better. And they were talking about researching. And I had asked, I'm thinking, well, what credentials do you have that you're going out there and you can research Bigfoot? They said, you don't need credentials to research Bigfoot. And I thought, you don't need to be an avid hunter. No, you don't need to be an avid hunter. So I looked at my husband, and my husband's like, oh no, he just starts shaking his head because he knows the new journey's going to begin for him. And I just turned and I looked at him and I'm like, I want to do this. And he goes, I already know. He goes, I already know. He goes, you don't need to tell me. I said, we need to start researching. I said, if there is a Squatch, I said, in Pennsylvania, I want to go find it. And he's like, woman, he goes, you're crazy. And I said, I am crazy. And I said, but we need to do this. And I think it's going to be a blast. So this is exactly what we did. We geared up. I bought tracking books. I started to learn how to track. I love tracking. And it doesn't necessarily mean Bigfoot, but, I like finding bear tracks, coyote tracks, the deer tracks, the little critter tracks, and, gone on a few Bigfoot hikes. Didn't hear or see anything until I joined up with Mary Fabian and her group, and she actually put me as a lead for Chester County at the time. And there was a gentleman talking about Dogman. And that I was very much intrigued with Dogman, because I'm thinking, wait a minute, Dogman exists? And a couple of people said, oh, yes, absolutely. And another gentleman said, if you want to know anything about Dogman, you need to call Kirk Reed. May he rest in peace. He's my buddy, and he just passed away. So I called him, got to be friends with him. He goes, you want to see a Bigfoot? And I said, I do. And he says, no. He says, it is in a Dogman area. How do you feel about that? And I thought, well, have you been there and walked out alive? And he says, I have. And I said, well, then let's go. I felt safe enough with him. Took my son, my husband just had surgery, so he was in no shape to be hiking down into hollers and crossing creeks and things like that. So my son went with me. My son, Kirk Reed, and another researcher. We went down to Washington County, PA, and it was late November. It was pretty cold. We went down into the holler and just sitting there, and it was it wasn't quite dark yet, and walking around and stuff like that. And I had talked to Kirk, and I said, Kirk, and I said, why do I feel so giddy right now? And he says, you're probably all, he says, maybe you're excited. And I thought, but this doesn't feel like it's my feelings. And then he says, uh-oh, I'm thinking, what's uh-oh? And he says, I think they like you. I think they're connecting with you right now. I'm like, who's they? And he says, Bigfoot. And I said, okay, now you just opened up a whole new realm for me. And I said, what do you mean Bigfoot? And they're connected with me, contacting me. And he says, well, you told me, he says, you seen one in 76. And I said, yes. And he was a strong believer that once you've witnessed, I call them elusive beauties now, they know that that they exist. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm all right with this. Because at the time, I'm just thinking these are just flesh and blood primates walking around in the woods. Didn't think anything else of their extra little powers that, people claim that they have. and that we often wonder if they do or don't. But we heard snaps, like tree cracks, really loud tree breaks. My son was about 30 yards away from us, and it was like down in a little bit of a ravine closer to the creek bed. And the ground already was just covered in leaves because it was fall. So finding tracks was next to impossible. I can do that now, though. I mean, 2 years of tracking, I can find a track in leaves now. But we turned to look at my son, and everybody just yelled for Dylan. And he's like, "Yep, I heard you. I heard it. I heard it." And he starts, he comes back and he walks back up to us. And we just discussed that if we were going to bring the trucks down into the holler, felt like it was a good place to camp. It's a good place for possible activity and maybe even a sighting. And so we decided to walk back up to the holler and get in the vehicles. And as we were walking back up to the holler, my son, he was ahead of us. So he goes, "What's that smell?" And I go and smell it, and did it not bring back all the memories from Montana? I just took a big old whiff of it, and I turned and I looked at the researchers behind me, and again, Dylan's like, "That's really bad." And they just shook their head, and I was like, "Dylan, I think a Squatch was at our trucks." And I said, as we were down in the holler, and I said, "I've heard that they like to be above and that they'll watch you from a higher elevation." And he was like, "No, I'm not buying it." He goes, "I think it's coyote." Thought, "Dylan, you know what coyote smells like." And I said, "We've lived in California long enough. We know the smell. We know what mountain lion smells like." And I said, I know what deer smells like. This is not deer. This is not coyote. This is not, I said, it's pretty bad. We got in the trucks, and what we had to do is we had to take our vehicles back to where another researcher was camped. We needed to go get he had a car, so we didn't think he was going to be able to get down into the holler. So we had to go get his stuff and bring the cars and everything back. As we got back to the holler, it was dark, and we were just hanging out still, and we heard one whoop. Then we heard another whoop on the other side of the holler. So basically from above the holler, one on one side and one on the other. And I just started chuckling, I'm thinking, what, I've never heard a whoop before. And Kurt goes, "That be a Squatch." And I'm thinking, okay, are you sure we're safe down here? And he's like, I believe so. And I said, "Well, I feel safe." And I said, I'm not scared. And I said, "So we're good." And he says, "We're good." Let me back up a little bit. I apologize. On the way to go pick up the other researchers' gear, my son told me, he says, "When I heard that tree snap," he says, "something growled in my face." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "It growled like as if it was right there in my face." And he goes, "There was nothing there." He goes, "That's when I said, 'Oh, I'm coming back." He goes, "Because it kind of freaked me out." And I'm thinking, so I said, "It wasn't in the distance?" He goes, "No, it was like right smack in the front of my face." And I'm thinking, well, that's really weird. And I said, maybe there's something down there more than just a Squatch, And I said, maybe spiritual? And he says, "I don't know." But as we were down there, some poachers, I'm assuming they were poachers. You could see them driving up on their trucks, and they were standing on the back of their truck and shining their lights and just shining the lights down on us. We all kind of ducked down a little bit until they left. And the other researcher was worried about his car parked up in the other area up by the creek. So we decided to get back in the trucks, not camp down there, go back to the car and camp up there, because figured he didn't want anybody messing with his vehicle, which I don't blame him. We were sitting around the fire, and it was cold. I think maybe 35 degrees at that time right there. It was cold. No tents. We were going to sleep in the vehicles. We heard coyotes. Everybody's saying coyotes. What I thought at first, it was like a sound of a siren, like somebody doing a fake siren sound. And then it just sounded like a bunch of chimpanzees just going crazy. It brought the hair on the back of your neck, and that's when I felt a little like, this is not cool. Like, what's going on right now? And I told my son, I'm like, are those chimpanzees? And he goes, Mom, he says, you know what coyotes sound like? And I'm thinking, that doesn't sound like coyotes. And he goes, no. He goes, they sound like they're being injured. And the other two researchers said, yes, those are coyotes, and something's attacking the coyotes. And I'm thinking, what could possibly be attacking the coyotes? And that's when Kirk said, it's either a Squatch, he says, or a Dogman. And he says, if the coyotes interfere with the Bigfoot hunt, they're gonna kill the coyotes. And we're just, none of us even thought to turn our recorders on. We were all in awe with what was going on because it was loud. And I'm talking maybe 50 to 100 yards away. It was that loud. And my son was like, gosh, he goes, this is heartbreaking just to hear them cry like that. And then it was one last yelp and it was done. It was silence. No more. You couldn't even hear the birds, owls, frogs, crickets, whatever. I mean, those woods went dead silent. The only thing that you could hear was the crackling of the fire and the creek. And then, of course, us talking. Kirk looked at me and he says, you still want to spend the night? And I said, I do. And he goes, you're one crazy woman. I said, well, should we leave? And he says, no. He goes, if you want to stay, he says, we'll stay. And I said, I am not scared. I said, for some reason, I said, maybe I'm being silly. Maybe I'm dumb. I don't know. I said, I'm just not scared. I'm not picking up on fear at all. And he's like, all right. It was about maybe 11:30, 12 o'clock. We decided, everybody was pretty much getting tired. So, and Dylan and I had to leave like about 4 a.m. because I had another hike to go to the next day. It was cold inside the truck. I know we're just sitting in like pins. We were wrapped up in sleeping bags. I could not sleep. My son, he fell asleep, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, the truck just like something big, like moved the truck. And I slowly started to turn my head, and I'm looking around, and I caught something very large in the front of the truck. And I'm going to have to say it was a black shadow because it was all already, fogged over. The frost was already setting in, and it moved real quick from the front of the truck, from the passenger side to the driver's side, real quick. And I looked over at Dylan and I'm thinking, Dylan, like, you awake? And he goes, yeah. He goes, what's going on? And I said, did you feel that bump? I said, or did you move? And he says, I didn't move, Mom. I'm like, did you feel the bump? And he goes, no, I was asleep. I said, then you didn't see what ran in front of the truck? And he goes, nope. He goes, probably a deer. And my son's he's a skeptic. He's very skeptic, and that's okay. I'm thinking, no, this can't, no, that was not a deer. And I'm just laying there and I'm thinking, I cannot sleep. I am just so cold. I think it was about 3:30, quarter to 4. I thought, you know what, I'm going to start this truck. I'm freezing. I am not going to sit here and freeze anymore. So I started the truck. I looked over at Kirk's car and I seen him moving around inside. And I didn't roll down the window yet, but you could hear in the distance a howl. And I'm thinking that has to be my brain vibrating right now because I haven't slept. I didn't think nothing of it. And I'm thinking, man, I'm like, it's really like humming inside my head. And as I rolled down the window, one of the other researcher, TJ, he gets out and he goes, "Did you hear that?" And I'm like, "I heard something." And I'm like, "What was it?" And he goes, "That was a howl." And I said, "Coyote?" He goes, "Oh no, that's no coyote." And I said, "Wolf?" He goes, "We don't have wolves down here." And he goes, "That was loud." He goes, "I heard it in my car." And I said, "Well, I thought it was my head humming." And he goes, "No, ma'am." He goes, "That was a howl." And I'm thinking, well, that's pretty awesome. It's like, all right. So we got whoops that night. We got tree breaks. We got dead coyotes. He says, I'm thinking, what's next? It was time to go. Kirk let us all out because we were very unfamiliar with the area. It is just the road's in, it's just one road. Like if two cars come, you're going to have to go like a V to pass each other. So we kind of followed each other out. No reception whatsoever. I had already tucked away the walkie-talkies. TJ was behind me, and I didn't see his headlights anymore. So I figured I got to notify Kirk somehow. As Kirk went to go make a left turn, I'm getting ready to make a left turn, and I seen something jump the road. And all I caught was hind legs they looked like very large canine legs, like German Shepherd, like a very hefty, strong German Shepherd legs. I didn't see no tail though. I just caught the legs, the thighs on down. And I looked at my son. I'm like, did you see that? And he says, no. He goes, I'm trying to see if I can pull up the map here. He said, I'm trying to get reception on the phone. And I'm thinking, man, I'm like, I don't know. I said, I just saw two big legs jump the road. And he says, probably a deer. And I'm thinking, yeah, it was a deer, all right. He goes, Mom, you're tired. And I'm like, you're right. Didn't think nothing of it. I go to turn off my lights, and I stopped the truck with hopes that Kirk would see that I stopped. He did stop. He backed up. Now, on the left, on the passenger side, is just like a big ravine that just comes down. Big wall of trees, dirt, rock. So there's no room for another car to pass. Kirk wasn't getting out of the truck. And I'm thinking, well, he's not going to know what I'm doing, if he doesn't get out. So I open up the door and I get out, and he opens up the door, and I said, we lost TJ. And he goes, get back in the truck, like really firm, really loud. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, okay, and he says, just follow me. Thinking, all right, I get back in the truck, and Dylan's like, is he mad? And I said, I don't know. Maybe he's just tired, And I said, probably mad because we lost TJ. I said, I don't know. So we went around. We found a way to turn around, go back. TJ was gone. So we decided, you know what? Everybody just go home. And TJ must have found another way out, because if we continue to drive around, we're just going to get ourselves lost. So we ended up going home. I ended up doing my hike with two other researchers. When I got home from that, I had called Kirk, and I said, Kirk, and I said, before we all stopped, and he says, yes, I know. And I said, what do you know? And he goes, I seen it. And I said, seen what? And he goes, Dogman. And I just looked, and I think my whole body just froze. I got chills. I think I even felt a little nauseous. And he goes, it was standing up. He goes, when I turned, he goes, it was standing right on that corner. He goes, and it leaped. And I said, yeah, I caught the back of its legs. And he says, we were driving through Dogman area and of where people have had Dogman sightings. I'm thinking, he goes, what? He goes, why the heck? He goes, do you think I told you to get back in the truck? And he goes, that's why you were so firm. And he goes, yes. And I said, then that explains that when I opened up that moment, I opened up that door before I even I felt like dread, like this big, heavy dread on me. I don't want to say it was painful, but just heavy. Didn't want to be here. Didn't feel good. Didn't feel, welcoming at all. But I didn't put those two together. But then when Kirk said that he witnessed the Dogman, that's when it confirmed to me, okay, that had to have been it. I don't think bears can jump like that. And definitely bears don't have paws like dogs. So that was, that sighting of, I believe, my Dogman. Now we want to go into Bigfoot. I have no explanations for the sightings that I've had, but I think the most magnificent sighting that I had was at Prince Glitzen camping last summer in July. We went on a camping trip. That night, we had some people talking at the campfire, some people talking, about Bigfoot and stuff like that. I went and stood by a campfire because I was really very cold and I just wanted to heat up. I heard 2 whoops, and we were on the peninsula area, like camping at Prince Glitzen on the peninsula. Forgive me for my pronunciation there. And I heard a whoop. And I turned to everybody and I said, I just heard a whoop. Another researcher says, I heard it too. And I thought, all right. And maybe 30 seconds, not even a minute later, another whoop. And turned my head again to tell everybody, I heard a whoop. And the other researcher goes, I heard it too. And no one really seemed to be interested in it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe they don't believe me. That's okay. Well, I think it was about 11 of us. We decided to go on a night hike. I believe it was about 10:30. It was about 10:30 at night. And we were walking and it was pretty bright out. I think the moon was giving us enough light to where we didn't even need the red lights to walk. We were walking alongside the lake, and I saw a black shadow about 30 yards to my left, closer to the lake. And I had told a few people, because we had to whisper. One of the gentlemen had recorders set up all throughout the woods, so we had to whisper. And a couple people, come up to me and said, what'd you see? And I said, well, I saw a dark shadow moving over there. And everybody just kind of split up and just went their own way. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to go over there and I'm going to go see what this is. Because silly me, crazy me, with no fear or the understanding what fear is, decides she's just going to mosey on towards the lake to find out what this big, huge shadow was. And I got up to the tree to where I had seen the shadow, and that whole space was really warm, like microwave warm, like oven heat warm. And the other researcher that walked with me, I said, come feel this, come walk through that. And he walked through it and he goes, "This is really hot right here." And I said, "This is where I saw that shadow." And he goes, "No." And I'm like, "Yes." I said, "Now walk back out." And he goes, "It's cold." So here we were, like, doing this dance into the heat. Like, we'd walk in, we'd say hot, we walk back out, and we say cold. A couple other researchers caught up with us, and I said, "This area right here," and I said, "This is where I saw the shadow," and I said, "It's really hot right here by the tree." And even one had to make a funny and said, "Well, it's from the sun." Thought, it's 10:30 at night. Where's the sun? This isn't. There's just no way the sun could heat this tree up when there was no sun. But as we were standing there, that heat began to fade. So it got cooler to back to where it was just normal temperature with everything else, with the air. I didn't hear any whoops. A couple of people heard more whoops, tree knocks, things like that. Somebody heard a grunt, but I think they just assumed it was a deer, because there was a lot of deer laying down that night in the fields. Now we went to bed. The next day it was raining. We couldn't do any hiking. And we decided, you know what, in between breaks, let's go for a hike. So it was just the three of us. We mosey on out of the camp, and we found another trail alongside the road. And we parked there, and we followed this trail up. And the whole time that we're walking on this trail, I looked to my friend Shelly, and I said, "Hey," said, do you feel that?" And she says, "I do." I said, "I feel like we're just being watched." And she says, "Yep." But I said, it could be the birds, the critters. Maybe they're all staring at us, and it's just giving us that feeling. And I said, "But I'm picking up this warm, fuzzy feeling." And I said, as if somebody's happy. And I said, "I'm not really that giddy right now." And I said, "Because it's raining." I said, "And we're soaked, And she says, "I know." And she says, "I'm feeling it, girl." She's like, "I'm feeling it." And as we're walking, like, towards the lake, we could hear a few, like, heavy, when you make a heavy step and the little twigs, like, crack. We could hear them, and we tried to stop and look. And when we stopped, it stopped. And we just kind of looked at each other, and, we're looking for tracks. We're going off the trail a little bit, looking for tracks, looking for tree structures. We're just kind of giggling, thinking, because we know that we're being watched. We know that we're being followed. By what? We didn't know. We got to the lake, and Stephen found two beautiful, and I'm going to say beautiful, Bigfoot tracks. Someone can say they were human. These were not human tracks. They had that break. It had everything. They were absolutely beautiful. Stephen decides he's going to cast the one that's not so far into the lake. The other one was more into the lake. It was a lot wetter. So he's prepping that area. He goes and he lays the cast. I turn my back to the lake, and I start to walk up the hill a little bit. To my left, I saw, like, glowing eyes in the bush, and about 10 feet away from me. And I kind of backed up a little bit, thinking, is that a deer? Like, what's going on? I go and I turn and I look, and I see this round little head, this wiry, like, messed up hair just sticking up all over. And as soon as we caught eyes, the eyes went black. And I'm thinking to myself, I squatted down, and I just said, "Well, look at you. Where's Mama? Where's Daddy?" Because this 100% was a small, young Sasquatch. Very young. I want to say it was a female only because it just felt like this was a female, because it just seemed like it was so doggone cute. Not saying that boy Sasquatches aren't cute, but this one, the button nose, it had not ape-like nose, but a human nose, but just push that tip of the nose down just a little bit. And it didn't have a flare like how the apes do, like the primates. It did not have that flare. It was just a cute, tiny little short button nose, round eyes, black, and I'm black as black. No whites in her eyes whatsoever. She had a little bit of hair coming down from like the top of like not the bridge, but the side of her nose, covering her cheek, going down, very little. Very thin, human-like lips. And I don't know if she was chewing on something or just moving, but her lips were moving as if she was like, just playing with her lips, because you could see her chin move. Her chin didn't have very much hair either. It was very, very short, fine, peach fuzzy-like hair. But she had a lot of hair on her head. I didn't see any ears. I did not see a neck. I saw a shoulder, but I couldn't see the rest of the body because she was sitting kind of like with her knees up, like squatting, and the bushes covered that. So I got like a good view of her head. And this whole time I'm talking to her. I'm just telling her, "Hey, we're not going to be very long. We're not here to hurt you." And I said, "We come in peace. Where is Mama?" The image of her face is just stuck in my mind. But in the meantime, I'm still talking to her. I'm asking where Mama is, where's Daddy. And the whole time now, a helicopter was going above my head, just making this really loud, obnoxious noise. I was not going to look up. I'm thinking, my eyes are locked onto you. Her eyes were locked onto me. She did not appear to be frightened in any way. She turned her head a little bit, and there was a tree to her right. She turned her head to the left, and I'm thinking maybe that's Mom and Dad coming in, and you could hear footsteps, not real heavy, just like somebody's walking into the tree lines, into the bush, underneath the branches and stuff. And I saw 2 big legs, and I saw the torso. That I knew was a male, because I could see like the torso, I didn't see bosoms like you would expect for a female Sasquatch. It was flat, not a whole lot of hair, but still hair covering it. Just like a hairy man with long hair, that would need to shave, that kind of thing. Just massive muscles. The legs, very muscular. And from the height, I would say 6 foot. Because I'm thinking, because I even said to her, and as it squatted, just squatted, it put its elbows on its knees. I could see the long hair from the forearms, from his wrist, hanging down. And he kind of I believe he put his hands together sitting there, because his hands disappeared behind the branch, because there was like a branch out from the pine, because it was like a pine. And I seen his eyes, and he had deep set brow line, but not deep like primates, not that deep. Black eyes, round. I could see the bridge of his nose. He had more hair on his face, coming from the high cheekbone, going down and around his mouth. He had very little hair on his chin. Very big, like human-like lips, like really full lips. And he was moving his lips around. He was blinking. You can see him blinking. And I'm thinking, right at the time, 6 foot, I even said, and there's Junior. And I started chuckling because this is at the point where, like, now I'm getting a little, like, nervous. But the whole time I couldn't take my eyes off of him. There was just no way I was going to take my eyes off him. Did I think of pulling out my camera? Absolutely not. I didn't. I was more or less in awe. Like, what am I seeing right now? Like, this is unbelievable. And I'm still wondering, where's Mom and Dad? Where's Mom and Dad? And this helicopter's just going woo, 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 like that over my head. And I'm thinking, you know what? You can fly over my head. I'm not taking my eyes off of these things. This is a once in a lifetime chance. And it was almost as if I couldn't take my eyes off. Like I was glued, frozen. But I was at peace, if that makes any sense to anyone that's listening. Just very, very peaceful, graceful moment. These things move with so much grace. Very slow. I can't even imagine if someone says, well, yeah, they're apes. No, they appeared human. They had more human attributes and characteristics of their movements, but not as, but just with a little more grace. I can't see someone very large coming in there and being able to squat like that and just hold that pose for, as long as they were able to. Now, in the meantime, Shelly comes into my view and she's like, LaVone, loud, really loud. I stood up and I looked at her and I was like, what? And she goes, did you not hear that? And I'm thinking she was going to talk about the helicopter, and I was like, what? And I'm like, talking to Bigfoot here, and I started chuckling and I still got them in my eyesight. They're not leaving. They're staying right there. And she says, 2 large trees, she goes, just went down back there behind the other trees. And I thought, no, I said, I did not hear that. And she says, I'm wondering, she goes, I know you said you don't scare easy. She goes, but dang, girl. She goes, you didn't even flinch. And I said, Shelly, I said, I didn't hear them. And I said, there's a helicopter going above our head. And when she came into view and she said, yelled my name, that helicopter noise quit, like on a dime. It just stopped. And I had told her, I said, there was a helicopter. She goes, there was no helicopter. She says, flying above us. And I thought, well, I heard helicopter. I said, my ears were going, whoa, 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 like that. Like I could literally feel the vibration in my ears. And I said, but I'm not, I said, can you see what I'm seeing? And she comes over to my left. So she's in between me and the lake. And she says, she just looks and she goes, I do. I said, what do you see? And she goes, I see a small Sasquatch, like a small one. I say, oh, she goes, yep. She goes, that's a young one. And Shelly has seen many. And she goes, that's a young one. All right. So she starts to take pictures. Steven slides me his camcorder. It's already going. I start to film and his camera is just doing this like black lines going across. It's, wiggly and jiggly. It's not picking anything up. And I gave him back the camera and I said, it's not working. And he says, all right. Shelly goes, LaVone, she says, come here. She goes, let's confirm what we're seeing. And she says, is this what you're seeing? And it was a blurred photo of eyes and a face. And I said, well, yeah. And I said, but it's not really clear. And I said, but yeah, that's it. And she says, yeah. She goes, that's how they photograph. She goes, it's blurred photos. And this whole time they're still sitting there. Shelly at her position, because she couldn't see Junior because the tree was blocking her view. I then decided to step back a little bit. Steven says, I think we've been here long enough. He goes, Mom and Dad haven't showed up yet. And he says, if that was mom and dad knocking trees down, he goes, I think that's our cue. We've got to go. So he goes to start to dig up his cast. Even though it wasn't dry, he's going to dig it up the best he can. And they kind of moved back away from the bushes, so they were gone. So that confirmed another confirmation. Whatever was there is gone. And I even said, thank you, we're leaving now. Shelly was like, yeah, thank you, we're leaving. Then Shelly says, oh my gosh. I'm thinking, what happened? And she goes, I just lost 5 days of photos. I said, in her camera, she goes, I lost 5 days. And she goes, I have no photos. She goes, that photo I just took? And I said, yeah. She goes, gone. And I said, you kidding me? And she's like, I'm not kidding you. And she goes, I'm going to have to go home and hopefully look in my iCloud, look, wherever they could possibly have gone. She's going to look. So as we're leaving, we're still saying, thank you. We felt completely blessed. I was on cloud 9. Shelly was giggling the whole time, and she's like, her and I were laughing so hard. And she goes, I know you're hearing impaired. And she says, but that was crazy. And I kept telling her, there was a helicopter going. She goes, there was no helicopter. And she goes, you got zapped. And I'm thinking, zapped? And she goes, they hit you with infrasound. I said, is that what they do? And she's like, yes. And I think, well, that was really strange. And I said, because that, my ears, and I said, it was like vibrations in my ears. Because the whole time I'm thinking, well, this helicopter is really obnoxiously loud, and why are they flying so low? Interfering with my moment here. And she goes, no helicopter. And she goes, you didn't hear those trees? I said, I did not hear those trees. And she goes, they echoed that whole lake. I'm thinking, well, I know I'm deaf. And I said, but I'm not that deaf. I said, I can hear noise. And I said, it's words that I have a problem with. And she's just laughing so hard because she was like mimicking me. She's like bending down. She's, like here you are talking to Bigfoot. And she goes, no worries. And she says, you had no fear, no nothing. You didn't flinch. She goes, we jumped back. And she goes, because she says, that's why I come towards you to pull you away, thinking mom and dad are coming in and they're pushing trees down. But they did not push any more trees down on us. We started to walk out. The rain started again. And the whole time we were escorted out. We could hear the crunching, the walking on both sides of the trail. And we just kept saying, we hear you, like a tree break. It's like, well, thank you. Every little bit of noise that we heard, we thanked them. It sounds crazy. I know most people are just sitting there saying, they would hightail it out of there. They wouldn't have, sat there and talked to them. I felt completely safe. I did not fear these things. I didn't even fear mom and dad. I can't even explain the emotions that I had. That it was so overwhelming and at peace as well. Overwhelming, but at peace. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment. Now, I've heard of others, having encounters like that too, and where they, face to face, some people said scared them. They, put their heads down and walked away. Many say, oh, don't look them in the eyes. Well, I was doing exactly that. I couldn't help it. I mean, it was instant lock eyes. I could not remove my eyes from either one of them. I believe they were just as curious of me and us three of what we were doing. Like, hey, what are you doing casting my footprints? That kind of, maybe I don't know what I don't know what they were thinking, but I do believe they were curious. And probably Junior was to protect baby. And he did exactly that. There was no way I was going to go in any further. I was going to stay right where I was at. Now, If Junior was to come start walking towards me, yes, I probably would have stood up, backed up, and said, okay, we got to go. But he sat there and he watched me. And I believe he knew our intentions. And, neither one of us were armed. I think that the most dangerous thing Stephen had was a knife to dig dig up his cast. I had no fear that day. Even walking back to the truck, we had no fear. When we got back to the truck, Shelley, was talking about her theory and about that they understand German because she's had, I guess she's trying to look up if they understand like different languages and heard stories about Germanic language or something. And she goes, can you say something in German to them? So I had, I said, let them know that, I thank them. I don't speak fluent German. So I said, Dankeschön. Kept saying Auf Wiedersehen. And just kept saying thank you. And I could not hear the whoop, but she heard a whoop. Not because I did not have my hearing, I didn't have my hearing aids in. And she was like, there you go. And then there was a few tree cracks, a tree knock in the distance. And again, we just said thank you. We got in the truck and we went back to camp. Now that night at camp, 11:30, 12 o'clock, midnight, Shelley was standing with her. Now we were set up in the middle of camp at Prince Glenson. We were set up in where all the dogs could be because we had our Australian Shepherd with us. Shelley was standing with her back towards the trees, and she was talking to me, and I could have swore I saw two eyes like way above her head. Shelley's short, way above her head, and I'm thinking, no, they would not be here. And I'm like, we're in the middle of a camp. There's no possible way they would be here. They would be seen. Somebody would see them. I think that's just lights from another camp. So I ignored it. Completely ignored it. Mac, I was always taking him close to the tree line, same area for him to go to the bathroom. And always clean up his mess. He did not want to go to that tree line and go to the bathroom. He whined and he literally yanked away. So I thought, well, fine, let's go in the grassy area over here. And he did his thing. On the way back to go to sit down, there was this loudest howl. And I mean, I don't know how far away, but much further away than the whole campsite, just a long, drawn out howl. And my husband was already laying down in the tent. And I said, did you hear that? And he goes, I did. My dog sat and he whined. There were no other dogs that barked. I would expect dogs to start barking if they heard that howl, that long howl. No dog barked. Mac, I tried to bring him back to the campfire and he was a little hesitant, but he eventually came back and he sat by my feet and we're just chatting away, just, still talking about the experience that we had. I'm still laughing at me because I completely went deaf at that moment. We heard this tink. Something hit the metal pole of the pop-up. And I'm looking around, and I thought, are these acorn trees? And Shelley goes, nope. And she already knew what was going on. And I said, something keeps like tinking over here, like Mac's picking up something. And I said, and she says, and then something else went, and Mac went and grabbed it, and it was a little pebble. And I thought, I just looked at her, and she goes, just act normal. And I'm like, what's going on right now? And she goes, they're throwing pebbles. I'm like, who's throwing pebbles? And she goes, they're in the tree line. And she puts her recorder on. Stephen and Shelley have been doing this for like 15 years, so they're like on it. She set her recorder down, and I'm thinking, they're in the tree line throwing pebbles at Mac? And she goes, they are. And he was literally, I had him on a leash, and he would chase every little pebble and pick it up. These weren't acorns, these were tiny little rocks. Now, mind you, there was no acorns around there. And we're just talking away. I decided, no more rock throwing. It got quiet. I think it was about 1 o'clock, and I decided that I'm going to go to sleep. Shelley, I believe she went to bed. We had our tent pretty close to the tree line. And after the little tree lines is where the potties are. So this is why I found it really hard to believe that a Squatch would make it to our camp, because it was pretty lit up over in, between after the tree line. That's where pretty lit up right there. But the tree line itself was dark. Now getting into tent, Mac, that's my dog's name. He didn't want to come in the tent. He was doing a lot of whining. I had to, reassure him, hey, come on, buddy, come on in. And he sat there and he just whined, and he kept looking up at the top of the tent. And at the top of the tent, you could see the small bug light that we had hung up there. And that thing was rocking, like back and forth rocking. There was no wind that night. It wasn't even raining. It was very, very quiet that night. I don't believe enough wind could have made that thing rock. And I tried to look to see if I saw a shadow of anything. I didn't see no shadow. Matt continued to cry. Something rubbed from this one side of the tent, and Mac literally followed it with his eyes. He was following it, and you could hear it go all the way to the other side and down, and he jumped up onto my cot and was crying. If it was a human, he would have barked, because that's all he does is bark at humans. He's being trained for that right now. But he'll bark at the moon, he barks at the clouds, he barks at anything that moves. He did not bark. I just kept reassuring him, we're going to be okay. It's okay, buddy. And I said, eventually they'll leave. I'm assuming it was a Squatch. That's how I was just going to look at it, as they're messing with the tents, because I've heard so many stories that they will mess with your tent. They'll come in closer because they know it's safe. Then I heard this, as I laid my head down right by my head, I heard this like that. And I'm thinking, I even said, wow. And I'm like, if you're trying to act like a turkey, I said, you need to get better than that. And I said, because that was a real poor turkey call. And I just chuckled. Mac whines. But Mac did not bark. He eventually settled down and got quiet. We fell asleep. The next morning, I told Shelley about it, and she says, yeah. She says she had tapping going on with her tent. And we thought, you know what, let's go look behind the trees and go see if we can't see any footprints. And it was all leafy there. So, but you could see deep impressions in the leaves that were much bigger than a human. So there was something there. Stephen found little tree twists, like little twists of the tree twigs. So we're thinking, all right, something was in here messing with us. And I was completely dumbfounded, because I'm thinking, how is it possible that they could find us in camp? Not many people were awake, that late at night, and maybe they decided to mess with us because we were awake. Did they follow us? Did they pick up our scent? I kind of thought, well, maybe we're being hoaxed, but I can't see a human throwing a pebble and hitting that metal, the metal on the pop-up, the covers every time. I can't see that. I can't see that happening. So that was pretty much that whole Bigfoot event. And I know many find it hard to believe. I'm still processing this whole moment as to why so many encounters when there are people out there that have spent years in the woods researching and haven't seen one. Right time, right place. I don't know. And I'm definitely not saying, we're anything special. But it's like, why? I can't answer that, and I mean, I've had more, but those are the ones that I'm not quite sure, One, yes, I do know that, it was a Bigfoot, but I can talk about that some other time. So that pretty much has been my experiences so far. Most of that, I guess the best experience within 2 years. I've had more experiences. I do believe that boots on the ground is the only way that anyone could come across these elusive beings. Follow those footprints, follow those deer tracks, coyote tracks, bear tracks, because you never know where it's going to lead. I'd love to come back and tell you more, and I hope I have a lot more to talk about in the future. Thank you.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking 8 bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Some are going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Some are going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. swing mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.